Stay with us. I'm just bringing into the conversation Natalie Bennett, former leader of the Green Party, who is also up in Glasgow. Hi, Natalie.
Good evening.
So a lot of jeopardy in those final moments. How do you feel about the fact that this revised deal with the words phase out of unabated coal being moved to phase down, but it was right at the 11th, well, not even the 11th hour, right at the last minute. It's gone through. How do you feel?
Well, we had an absolutely awful deal, and it has now got even worse. And I think when you listen to the speakers from the small island nations, the shock and the horror is very clear in their voices. And what we've seen, this was supposed to be keeping 1.5 alive. What we've got is a train, the 1.5 train, is sitting there in the siding. It hasn't started to move. It's been, it's failed by the UK presidency. What we're going to have to see is in Egypt in a year's time, that train's going to have to be put on the tracks and run at an absolutely amazing, astonishing speed to get us to anywhere to have any chance of meeting 1.5.
And Natalie, Alok Sharma, president of COP, he looked very emotional about it. He briefly burst into tears and apologised for the process which ended up in this big compromise. Do you have sympathy for him? He has done it's quite a tough job, isn't it, trying to get everybody to agree?
Well, I think what we've seen is a real failure of leadership from particularly the global north. India is rightly going to get a lot of blame for the change in the wording on coal. But what we've also seen, and we just had an intervention from Antigua and Barbuda saying, climate finance disappeared. The EU was a particular failure in this. Climate finance disappeared, I think it was yesterday. And they were saying, give us reassurance that we will get loss and damage finance. All we've got is a tick that says, yes, we acknowledge loss and damage finance. These are people, who are struggling to survive in the face of hurricanes, fires, cyclones, rising sea levels. My sympathy is with people in that situation.
Yes, of course. And, as well as this language on fossil fuels, as you say, this loss and damage issue was a huge issue. And, do you think that the reason why there's been a bit of reticence is that lots of companies don't want to accept sort of legal liability, particularly, say, developed countries in the global north? They don't want to accept liability and maybe open up another can of worms in terms of other liabilities?
Well, the liability is clearly there. The responsibility is extraordinarily clear in the science. And this is a moral argument. It's a legal argument that says if you've caused damage, you have to pay reparations. But it's also a practical argument. If we are going to have a stable, secure world for us all to live in, then people who've been robbed for many generations by the global north, by colonialism and neo-colonialism, have to be given the tools, repaid for all of that damage, and given the tools to have a decent life. And that's what this COP has utterly failed to do.
Alok Sharma said, look, there are some progress. There's been progress on coal, cars, cash and trees. I know you're very disappointed with some of the language, but, is there anything you are positive about and we can be positive about in terms of going forward to COP27 in Egypt?
What I'm really positive about and is really encouraging and does give me hope is what I've called the shadow COP, the COP of the charities, the campaigning groups, the NGOs, the scientists running alongside this COP. It's the COP of the streets. It's the COP of a group I spoke to, She Changes Climate. People who are getting together and saying we're not going to accept this world as it is. And that's where all of the innovation, all of the ideas, the idea of doing things in different ways, not business as usual with changed technology, not looking back to the failed old technology of the 20th century like nuclear, but saying there's enough resources on this planet for everyone to have a decent life and for us to look after the climate, look after nature, if we just share them out fairly. And that's where my hope comes from, because being built on the streets, being built in the much less fancy rooms around Glasgow, people have been meeting wherever they can, is a vision of a different world. And that's getting stronger by the minute.
Yes, I mean, many people have argued that, as you say, that the world leaders in the suits in the VIP rooms in Glasgow are very much powered by people power, people taking to the streets, people campaigning, people of all ages, all backgrounds, very, very worried about this. And in some ways, the people are sort of ahead on some of the politicians. But Natalie Bennett, how do you keep the momentum up on this? How do you ensure that, we've had 2 weeks of lots of media coverage on COP, but what about the circus moving on? How do you keep this issue prominent? And how do you also get the message across that this is something that it's going to be a fair way of doing? Because a lot of people are worried about how much this might cost them on a personal level.
Well, I think addressing the keeping things going point, the UK presidency continues for the next year, and lots of people here, from all around the world are saying the UK presidency really, has failed here in Glasgow, but it has a job to do over the coming year. And indeed, I tweeted that, and Zach Goldsmith, Minister in the Lords, agreed with me and said yes. So, we start putting the government's feet to the fire tomorrow and saying, why did you not join the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance? Wales has, but the UK hasn't. Let's push on that. They're the people who are the countries and states who are out there leading. So that's happening. And in terms of the cost, well, the obvious unanswerable response to that is the cost of inaction is far, far greater for all of us. But also, many of the actions that we need to take will actually make people's lives better. Insulating homes, which the government has singularly failed to do, this would give people warm, comfortable, affordable to heat homes, cut their bills, and indeed cut our excess winter deaths. Encouraging walking and cycling, providing public transport. This makes people healthier, cleans up our air, improves our communities. So many of the things that we're talking about doing are good for both people and planet, as well as being absolutely essential and inescapable.
Well, Natalie Bennett, we're really grateful for your time. Thanks very much for speaking to us live from COP. That's Natalie Bennett, former Green Party leader. She sits in the House of Lords.